A normal day turns into a nightmare. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the Boston University campus as Claire Anderson hurried to her morning photography class. At 23, she had her entire life planned out perfectly. Graduate with honors, open her own photography studio, maybe travel through Europe capturing street scenes and hidden moments. She was a dreamer with a camera always hanging around her neck. Seeing the world through frames and perfect lighting, Claire lived a simple but purposeful life. She shared a tiny apartment with her best friend Rachel Bennett near campus. Money was always tight, but they made it work with part-time jobs and cheap dinners. Claire came from a traditional Catholic family in Dorchester. Her father Roberto worked construction, and her mother Jenny stayed home raising Claire and her two younger brothers. They were not wealthy, but they had love, faith, and strong values. What made Claire different from many girls her age was her decision to wait. She had never been intimate with anyone. It was not because of pressure or strict rules, but simply because she wanted her first time to mean something real. In a world where everyone rushed through everything, Claire moved at her own careful pace. The clinic visit 2 months earlier. Claire had visited the Boston Women's Health Clinic for a routine checkup. Her periods had become irregular, and Rachel convinced her to get things checked out properly. The clinic was one of those expensive places with leather chairs, soft music, and the smell of lavender mixed with medical cleanliness. Dr. Patricia Morgan, a woman in her late 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, performed the examination. She seemed distracted that day, barely making eye contact with Claire. The exam was quick and clinical. Dr. Morgan used what Claire thought was a standard medical procedure. There was a brief moment of discomfort, then it was over. What Claire did not know was that in the laboratory next door, a catastrophic mistake was happening. A young lab technician, exhausted from working double shifts, had mixed up 2 samples. One was ordinary saline solution for gynecological exams. The other was a carefully preserved sperm sample belonging to Daniel Whitmore, a wealthy businessman who had stored his genetic material due to fertility concerns. Dr. Morgan, distracted and rushing through her appointments, grabbed the wrong syringe. She injected Daniel's sperm sample into Claire during what should have been a routine exam. Nobody noticed the error. Nobody checked twice. And Claire walked out of the clinic with informational pamphlets about nutrition, completely unaware that her life had just changed forever. The shocking discovery 6 weeks passed, normally. Claire focused on her photography assignments, worked her part-time job at a campus bookstore, and spent evenings editing photos in her cramped apartment. But then her body started changing. She felt constantly tired. Nausea greeted her every morning. Her breasts felt tender and heavy. At first, she blamed stress from upcoming exams. Rachel noticed something was wrong during lunch at their favorite campus cafe. Claire had not touched her sandwich and her face looked pale and drawn. After some careful questions, Rachel asked the one thing Claire had not allowed herself to consider: "When was your last period?" Claire counted backward in her mind, once, twice, 3 times. Her face went white with realization. That same afternoon, locked in their tiny bathroom, Claire took 3 pregnancy tests. Each one showed the same impossible result: positive, positive, positive. Panic flooded through her. This could not be happening. She had never been with anyone. She was a virgin. How could she possibly be pregnant? It made no logical sense. But the tests did not lie. Neither did her changing body. Family rejection telling her parents was the hardest thing Claire had ever done. She sat in their modest living room, surrounded by family photos and her mother's handmade blankets, trying to find words for something impossible. When she finally told them about the pregnancy, the silence was crushing. Her father Roberto's face turned red, then purple with rage. He stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward. His voice started quiet, but quickly rose to a roar. He accused Claire of lying, of betraying the family, of throwing away everything they had sacrificed to give her. "I raised you better than this," he shouted, his hands shaking with anger. "I work myself to the bone to send you to college. And this is how you repay us? By getting pregnant like some careless girl?" Claire tried to explain that she had never been with anyone, that something must have gone wrong, that she did not understand how this happened. But her father would not listen. He called her a liar and worse. He told her to pack her things and leave. She was no longer welcome in his house. Her mother Jenny sat silently through it all. Tears running down her face, rosary beads clutched in her trembling hands. She did not defend Claire. She did not stand up to her husband. She just sat there praying, while her daughter's world fell apart that night. Claire packed a single suitcase with shaking hands. She left behind her childhood bedroom, her family photos, and any sense of security she had ever known. Rachel opened her apartment without hesitation, clearing space in her tiny closet and giving Claire the better half of their shared futon. Anne's unexpected opportunity. The following weeks were dark and confusing. Claire struggled with morning sickness, exhaustion, and the constant fear of an uncertain future. She could barely afford her share of rent, let alone medical care for her pregnancy. She withdrew from most of her classes, unable to focus on anything except survival. Then Rachel came home one evening with surprising news. Her boss had mentioned that a friend needed a freelance photographer for some corporate events. The pay was excellent. The client was someone important in Boston's business world. That is how Claire found herself 3 days later, standing in the marble lobby of Whitmore Enterprises. Everything around her screamed wealth and power. The floors gleamed like mirrors. Enormous windows offered breathtaking views of Boston Harbor. This was a world she had only seen in magazines, completely different from her small apartment in campus life. A professional woman named Lisa Chen, Daniel Whitmore's executive assistant, led Claire to a conference room. "Mr. Whitmore will see you shortly," Lisa said with a polite smile. "He is finishing another meeting." Claire sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire semester tuition. She tried to calm her racing heart. She was 3 months pregnant now, barely showing, but constantly aware of the life growing inside her. She wore a loose black dress that hid her small belly and had pulled her dark hair into a professional bun. The door opened, and Daniel Whitmore walked in. Claire had expected someone older, colder, more corporate. Instead, Daniel was 36, but looked younger, with dark hair slightly messy, as if he ran his hands through it often. His blue eyes held a sadness she recognized because she saw the same thing in her own mirror every morning. He wore an expensive suit, but his tie was loosened, and there was exhaustion in his posture. When he extended his hand to greet her, something electric happened. The moment their hands touched, Claire felt a spark of recognition that made no logical sense. His hand was warm and strong, and he held hers slightly longer than necessary. "Your portfolio is very impressive," Daniel said, his voice deep and warm. "Rachel spoke highly of your work." They talked about the job, a corporate gala planned for the following month. But underneath the professional conversation, something else was happening. Their eyes kept meeting and holding for seconds too long. When Daniel leaned forward to look at her photographs more closely, Claire caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and woody, and found herself leaning in too. "This photograph," Daniel said softly, pointing to a black and white image of an elderly couple holding hands. "This captures something real. Not just what they look like, but who they are to each other. That is what I try to do," Claire replied, her throat tight with emotion. "Capture the truth beneath the surface." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw a loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The connection between them was undeniable, unexplainable, and completely inappropriate given that he was married and she was pregnant. They were supposed to be discussing business. "The job is yours if you want it," Daniel finally said, standing abruptly as if needing to create distance. "Lisa will handle all the contract details." As Claire gathered her things to leave, she stumbled slightly on the carpet edge. Daniel's hands immediately steadied her, gripping her shoulders gently. They stood so close now that Claire could feel his warmth, could see tiny flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could count the beats of her own racing heart. Slowly, carefully, Daniel raised his hand and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers barely touched her skin, but the contact sent shivers through her entire body. "You have sad eyes," Daniel whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Beautiful, but sad." Claire's eyes closed for just a moment at his touch. When she opened them again, she found him staring at her with an intensity that stole her breath. Something wash-a-painting between them, something neither understood but both felt deeply. "I should go," Claire managed to say, stepping back and breaking the spell, but as she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her. And she knew somehow that this was not just a job opportunity. This was the beginning of something that would change both their lives. Forever. Neither of them knew yet that the baby growing inside Claire carried Daniel's DNA. Neither of them knew about the catastrophic medical error that had bound them together months before they ever met. They only knew that something impossible and inevitable had begun between them, and somewhere in a hospital laboratory, a terrible secret waited to be discovered. Working together the weeks following their first meeting changed everything for Claire. She began working for Daniel Whitmore regularly, photographing his corporate events and business projects. Every interaction deepened the connection between them. They would meet in his office late at night when the building was empty, talking for hours about everything except the attraction growing between them. Daniel told her about his childhood, about losing his father at 15 and growing up in a house filled with silence and grief. He explained how he built his real estate company from the ground up, honoring his father's legacy. Claire shared her own stories about growing up in Dorchester, about finding freedom through photography, about seeing the world differently through a camera lens. The connection between them was magnetic. Sometimes their hands would brush while looking at photographs together. Sometimes their eyes would meet and hold for long moments filled with unspoken words. But Daniel never crossed the line. He was still technically married to Vanessa, even though he explained their marriage had been dead for years. Claire's pregnancy progressed. At 4 months, her belly was becoming harder to hide. She wore loose sweaters and positioned her camera bag strategically. Daniel never asked directly. She sometimes caught him looking at her midsection with an expression she could not read, a mother's concern one afternoon. Claire received an unexpected text from her mother, Jenny. They had not spoken since the night Roberto kicked her out. The message was simple but desperate. "I need to talk to you. Please." They agreed to meet on a bench near the Boston University Library, neutral ground where emotions might stay contained. When Jenny appeared, Claire barely recognized her. Her mother had aged terribly in just a few months. New gray streaks lined her hair, deep wrinkles marked her face, and her shoulders curved under invisible weight. "Your father does not know I am here," Jenny said quietly, sitting down but maintaining distance. "He would be furious if he knew." "Then why did you come?" Claire asked, trying to keep bitterness from her voice. "Because you are my daughter." Jenny turned to face her, tears already forming. "Because I carried you for 9 months, and I abandoned you when you needed me most. I cannot live with that anymore." The tears Claire had been holding back finally fell. "Do you believe me now? That I never did anything wrong?" "I want to believe you," Jenny said honestly. "But Claire, how is this possible? How can you be pregnant if you have never been with anyone?" Something clicked in Claire's mind then. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and opened her calendar app. She counted backward to the date Dr. Morgan gave her for conception. Her face went pale. "The exam," she whispered. "Mom, the conception date they gave me is exactly the same day as my gynecological exam at the clinic. Not a few days before or after." Exactly that day, Jenny frowned, trying to understand. "What are you saying?" "I am saying something happened at that clinic." Claire stood up, her mind racing with possibilities that seemed impossible, but were the only explanation. Something went terribly wrong, some kind of mistake. "Mom, will you come with me? I need to go back there and find out what happened," the truth revealed an hour later. Claire and Jenny stood in the lobby of the Boston Women's Health Clinic. The receptionist tried to turn them away, but Jenny was not taking no for an answer. "My daughter came here as a virgin and left pregnant," Jenny said firmly, leaning over the desk. "Now you can take us to Dr. Morgan, or I can call my lawyer in every newspaper in Boston. Your choice." The threat worked. 10 minutes later, they sat in Dr. Morgan's office. The doctor looked much older and more nervous than Claire remembered. Her hand shook slightly as she opened Claire's medical file. "Miss Anderson," Dr. Morgan said carefully, "how can I help you today?" "I want to know exactly what procedure was performed during my exam on June 15th, Claire said. keeping her voice steady despite her pounding heart. It was a routine gynecological examination. As you requested, then why did I leave here pregnant? Claire demanded. The silence that followed felt endless. Dr. Morgan opened and closed her mouth several times, her face cycling through shades of red and white. Before she could respond, the office door burst open. A young nurse Claire vaguely recognized stood there, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. When she saw Claire, something inside her broke completely. "I am so sorry," the nurse sobbed, rushing into the room. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. Nurse Collins, what are you doing?" Dr. Morgan stood up, her voice shrill with alarm, but the nurse ignored her completely. She turned to Claire, tears streaming down her face. "I was exhausted. I had been working double shifts. The labels on the samples looked so similar. I grabbed the wrong one from the refrigerator. I did not even realize until weeks later what I had done. And when I did, I panicked. I did not know how to fix it." "What sample?" Jenny asked sharply. "What are you talking about?" The nurse took a shaky breath. There was a sperm sample from a patient who had stored genetic material for possible future fertility treatments. His sample was being prepared for a surrogate insemination the same day as your exam. I grabbed the wrong syringe. Dr. Morgan injected it into you without checking first." Claire felt the room spinning. Her mother's hands gripped her shoulders, keeping her from falling. This could not be real. This could not be happening. "Who?" Claire managed to whisper. "Who is the father?" The nurse retrieved a folder from a filing cabinet with trembling hands. She opened it, revealing medical documents with a name printed clearly at the top. A name Claire knew intimately. A name she whispered in the darkness. A name that was now etched permanently on her heart. Daniel Whitmore. The impossible connection, the silence that followed was absolute. Claire could hear her own heartbeat, the ticking clock on the wall, distant voices in the hallway, but none of it seemed real. Daniel, the man she had been falling in love with. The man whose touch made her feel alive. The man who held her like she was precious. He was her baby's biological father. Fate had not just connected their lives. It had intertwined them forever through the child growing inside her before they ever met. "Claire." Mother's voice seemed to come from far away. "Claire, do you know this man?" Claire looked at her mother, at the panicked nurse, at Dr. Morgan, who looked on the verge of collapse. Then slowly, she began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was hysterical, bordering on madness. The sound of someone whose entire world had just been turned completely upside down. "I know him." Claire finally managed between laughs that turned to sobs. "I work for him. We have been spending time together. Oh God, what am I going to do?" Jenny pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, letting her cry like she used to when Claire was small and had scraped her knee. But there was no simple bandage for this wound. "We will figure this out," Jenny whispered, stroking her hair. "Together, we'll figure it out." Difficult conversations while Dr. Morgan and the nurse argued about legal liability and what steps to take next. Claire's mind was somewhere completely different. She was thinking about Daniel, about how to tell him, about how he would react to learning the baby she had been hiding was his daughter. The connection they felt from the beginning was not just attraction. It was biology. It was destiny. It was a catastrophic medical error that somehow felt more and more like a miracle. That night, Claire could not sleep. She lay on Rachel's futon, her hand resting on her belly where Daniel's daughter was growing. Daniel's daughter. The words echoed in her mind like a prayer and a curse. She knew she had to tell him. He deserved to know. But how do you start that conversation? How do you explain that the universe or fate or random chance had bound you together in the most intimate way possible before you ever spoke? The next morning, Claire sent Daniel a simple text message. "We need to talk. It is urgent. Can we meet today?" His response came within seconds. "Anything. Always. Come to my office whenever you are ready." 3 hours later, Claire stood in Daniel's office. He was alone, having cleared his schedule the moment he received her message. When he saw her face, saw the tears she was trying to hold back, he immediately pulled her into his arms. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. Whatever it is, we will handle it together. Claire pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. Those beautiful blue eyes that held such kindness and strength. She took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. I found out what happened, she began, her voice shaking. I found out how I got pregnant. Daniel listened in stunned silence as Claire told him everything. The medical error, the mixed-up samples, the nurse's confession, the documentation that proved beyond doubt that the sperm sample belonged to him. When she finished, Daniel just stared at her. His face cycled through shock, disbelief, confusion, and then slowly something that looked like wonder. Mine. He finally whispered, You are saying the baby you are carrying is mine? Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. Daniel took a step toward her, then another, moving like a man in a trance. His hands reached out, trembling, and hovered over her belly. May I? He asked, his voice breaking. Claire took his hands and placed them on her rounded stomach, where his daughter was growing. The moment his palms made contact, the baby kicked. A strong flutter that could not be mistaken. She kicked, Daniel whispered, amazed. I felt her. She is really there. The doctors think it is a girl, Claire said softly. Daniel fell to his knees then, his hands still on her belly, his forehead pressed against the fabric of her dress. His shoulders shook as he cried. Deep, silent sobs that came from somewhere profound. I thought I would never have this, Daniel said, his voice muffled. After losing our first baby, after all the failed treatments, I thought this part of my life was over before it began. And now you are telling me there is a child? My child. Our child. He looked up at her, his blue eyes red, but shining with fierce intensity. I am going to be a father. And you, Claire Anderson. You are giving me the greatest gift I could ever receive. A love-declared Daniel stood up and took Claire's face in his hands. I love you, he said. The words simple, but weighted with everything he felt. I know it seems too fast. I know you might not feel the same way yet. But I need you to know. I love you, Claire, and I love our daughter. And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you both. Claire could not speak through her tears, so she just nodded and let him pull her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. I am going to divorce Vanessa, Daniel said firmly. I should have done it years ago. Our marriage has been dead for a long time. But I was going through the motions, too afraid to make the change. You changed everything, Claire. You and our baby girl? What if Vanessa fights us? Claire asked, fear creeping into her voice. What if she tries to take the baby? She will not win, Daniel promised. We have medical documentation. We have proof of everything. Any court will see that this baby is ours, that we belong together. They spent the rest of that day together, making plans and dreaming about the future. Daniel called his lawyer immediately and started divorce proceedings. He arranged for Claire to move into a safe apartment he owned, somewhere comfortable where she and the baby would have everything they needed. That night, in Daniel's private suite adjacent to his office, they made love for the first time. It was slow and tender, filled with reverence for what they were creating together. Not just physical connection, but a family, a future, a love born from impossible circumstances. Afterward, lying in his arms with his hand resting protectively over their daughter, Claire felt truly safe for the first time in months. She felt seen, loved, and valued. She felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay, but in Boston's shadows. Vanessa Whitmore was learning about the pregnancy, and she was not going to let go of her life as Mrs. Whitmore without a fight. The storm arrives the morning after Claire and Daniel first made love. They woke wrapped in each other's arms. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden patterns across their bare skin. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect and right. Then Daniel's phone rang. The caller ID showed his head of security. Daniel answered, and Claire watched his expression change from contentment to concern to something close to fear. Vanessa knows. Gosh, Daniel said after hanging up. She hired a private investigator. She has photographs of us together. She knows about the baby. Claire felt ice flood through her veins. What does this mean? It means she is going to fight, Daniel replied grimly. And Vanessa fights dirty, he was right. Within hours, legal documents arrived. Vanessa was filing for divorce, but with conditions that made Claire's blood run cold. She was demanding half of everything Daniel owned. She was challenging the paternity of the baby, claiming Claire had fabricated the medical error story to trap a wealthy husband. Most terrifying of all, she was threatening to sue for custody, arguing that an unstable 23-year-old with no family support was unfit to raise a child. Daniel immediately called his legal team. The best divorce attorneys in Boston gathered in his conference room, reviewing documents and planning strategy. Claire sat quietly, listening to them discuss her life in legal terms. Feeling small and powerless? We have strong evidence. Richard Foster, Daniel's lead attorney, said. The medical records from the clinic are clear. The nurse's confession is documented. DNA testing will prove paternity beyond doubt. But Vanessa has connections, another lawyer added. She knows judges, politicians, wealthy families. She can make this ugly and expensive. I do not care what it costs. Daniel said firmly, his hand finding Claire's under the table. We protect Claire and the baby. That is the only priority. Dangerous discoveries while the legal battle began, something else was unfolding. Daniel's business partner, Thomas Brennan, had gone missing. Thomas had been auditing the finances of a development deal involving a businessman named Richard Westbrook. Then he simply disappeared, not answering calls or showing up for meetings. Daniel hired private investigators to find Thomas. What they discovered was disturbing. Thomas had uncovered evidence that Westbrook was using his real estate developments to launder money from illegal operations. When Thomas confronted Westbrook at a charity gala, Westbrook threatened him. Claire remembered that gala. She had photographed it weeks earlier. She pulled up her files and began going through hundreds of images. And there, in the background of one photo, she found something chilling. Vanessa Whitmore talking intimately with Richard Westbrook. Their heads bent close together, expressions conspiratorial. Daniel, Claire called softly. You need to see this. Daniel stared at the photograph, his jaw clenching with barely contained anger. Vanessa knows Westbrook, and she never mentioned it. Over the next few days, they pieced together a disturbing picture. Thomas had gone to Vanessa for help, thinking as Daniel's wife she would want to protect his business interests. Instead, Vanessa saw an opportunity. She made a deal with Westbrook. She would ensure Thomas's silence in exchange for Westbrook using his connections to destroy Claire's reputation and help Vanessa win the custody battle. The investigators found Thomas, hiding in a hotel in Providence, terrified for his life. He had recorded his conversation with Vanessa, capturing her cold, calculated manipulation. I just need him to disappear for a few weeks, Vanessa's voice said on the recording. Long enough for Daniel to panic and realize he needs me to handle crises like this. And in return, you make sure his little girlfriend cannot get work anywhere. Destroy her reputation. Make everyone think she is just another gold digger. Hearing the hatred in Vanessa's voice made Claire feel physically sick. This woman did not just want to win. She wanted to destroy Claire completely. The fight intensifies, the legal battle became brutal. Vanessa leaked stories to the media, painting Claire as a calculating woman who seduced a vulnerable married man. Gossip columnists wrote cruel articles. Claire's photograph appeared in tabloids with headlines like "The Other Woman" and "Baby Trap." Claire could barely leave the apartment Daniel had arranged for her. Photographers camped outside, shouting questions whenever she appeared. Her phone rang constantly with reporters wanting comments. Even her professors at Boston University began treating her differently, their disappointment evident. The only bright spot was her mother. Jenny had stood by Claire through everything. She attended legal meetings, held Claire when she cried, and refused to let Roberto's anger drive a permanent wedge between mother and daughter. Slowly, Jenny was building a bridge back to Claire, choosing her daughter over her husband's pride. Daniel was incredible through it all. He attended every doctor's appointment, his hand holding Claire's as they watched their daughter on ultrasound screens. He fought every legal battle with fierce determination. He held Claire through panic attacks and promised her repeatedly that they would win. At 6 months pregnant, Claire's belly was round and obvious. The baby kicked constantly, making her presence known. Sometimes Daniel would talk to the baby, his lips pressed against Claire's skin, telling their daughter about the world she would soon enter. "We are going to give you everything," he whispered one night. "Love, security, a family that chooses you every single day. Your mom is the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. And I promise you will grow up knowing how much we wanted you." The turning point, the breakthrough, came from an unexpected source. Nurse Collins, the woman whose mistake had started everything, came forward with additional evidence. She had kept detailed records of the day of the error, including security footage showing Dr. Morgan's distraction and the mislabeled samples. More importantly, she revealed that Vanessa had contacted the clinic weeks earlier, trying to bribe staff members to destroy Claire's medical records. Vanessa had offered significant money to anyone who would testify that Claire was lying about the medical error. "This changes everything," Richard Foster said excitedly. "This shows consciousness of guilt. Vanessa knows the medical error is real. She would not be trying so hard to suppress evidence." The judge overseeing the divorce case agreed. When presented with the evidence of Vanessa's attempts to tamper with medical records, combined with the recording of her conspiracy with Westbrook, the judge became much less sympathetic to Vanessa's claims. DNA testing was performed, and the results were absolute. Daniel Whitmore was the biological father of Claire's baby with a 99.9% certainty. The medical error was proven beyond any doubt. Vanessa's custody threats collapsed. No judge was going to take a baby from its biological parents. Based on the accusations of a woman who had tried to destroy evidence and conspire with criminals, the divorce was finalized. On a cold December morning, Daniel walked out of the courthouse a free man, no longer bound to a woman who had made his life miserable for years. He went straight to Claire, who was waiting in a car with Rachel. "It is over," Daniel said, climbing into the back seat and pulling Claire into his arms. "We won. We are free." New beginnings. Claire went into labor 3 weeks later on a snowy January evening. Daniel drove her to the hospital, his hand gripping hers, both of them excited and terrified. Rachel met them there, along with Jenny, who had finally convinced Roberto to come and meet his grandchild. The labor was long and difficult. 17 hours of contractions, exhaustion, and pain. But Daniel never left Claire's side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, breathed with her through every contraction, and told her repeatedly how strong she was. When their daughter finally arrived, screaming and perfect, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The nurse placed the baby on Claire's chest, and Claire looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the perfect little fingers and toes. "She is beautiful," Claire whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She is perfect." Daniel agreed, his own face wet with tears. He leaned down and kissed Claire's forehead, then gently touched his daughter's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his, gripping tight. "Look at that," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "She already knows her daddy." They named her Grace Elizabeth Whitmore. Grace for the unexpected blessing she represented. Elizabeth for Claire's grandmother, who had always believed in second chances. Roberto. Anderson held his granddaughter that evening, tears running down his weathered face. He looked at Claire, really looked at her for the first time in months. "I am sorry," he said simply. "I should have believed you. I should have fought for you. Can you forgive me?" Claire, exhausted and emotional, just nodded. Forgiveness would take time, but they had time now. They had a future. Happily ever after, 6 months later, Daniel and Claire stood in a small chapel surrounded by close friends and family. Baby Grace slept peacefully in Rachel's arms as Daniel and Claire exchanged vows. They promised to love each other through impossible circumstances. They promised to build a family based on choice rather than obligation. They promised to never take for granted the miracle that had brought them together. When Daniel kissed his bride, everyone in the chapel cheered. And in that moment, looking at her husband and their beautiful daughter, Claire finally believed that happy endings were possible. The medical error that should have been catastrophe had become the greatest gift of their lives. It brought together two people who might never have found each other otherwise. It created a love story that defied logic and probability. Daniel started a foundation to help young mothers facing unexpected pregnancies, providing resources and support so no one would have to face what Claire faced alone. Claire opened her photography studio, specializing in capturing real families in their honest, beautiful moments. They bought a house in the suburbs with a big backyard where Grace could play. They filled it with laughter, love, and the ordinary magic of daily life. Some nights, after putting Grace to bed, they would sit on their porch and marvel at how everything had worked out. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if the error never happened? Claire asked one evening, nestled against Daniel's chest. Never, Daniel replied firmly, because then I would not have you. I would not have Grace. I would still be stuck in a dead marriage, going through the motions, never knowing what real love feels like. He tilted her face up to kiss her. You are the best mistake that ever happened to me. Claire smiled against his lips. And you are my impossible miracle. Inside the house, baby Grace stirred in her crib, making soft sleeping sounds. Two people who should never have met were now building a life together. A catastrophic error had become a beautiful destiny, and in the end, that was the greatest truth of all. Sometimes life's biggest mistakes lead to its most precious gifts. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible. Sometimes love finds a way. Even when every logical reason says it should not, the medical mix-up that changed everything had given them each other. And that was worth more than any carefully planned life could ever be.